Men, our moods, our emotions. We're going to be talking about it, and we're going to start off with anxiety. Are you feeling stressed or are you feeling anxious? Are they different? Are they the same? How are they related? And most importantly, what can you do about it? Watch this video to find out. Coach Drew. Hey everybody, Coach Drew here, the coach of choice for men who want to improve their marriages and their lives. Today we are going to start by debunking the myth about men and our emotions. The myth is that we don't have any. Have you heard anything so ridiculous? It's absolutely ridiculous. We have emotions like everybody else. However, men are not as well versed in navigating and talking about those emotions. And that's what this video is all about. This series of videos that we're going to do is going to be talking about men, our emotions, our mental health, and how that impacts us and our relationships.
Y'all ready for this?
So the first one we're going to talk about today is anxiety. It is one of the most common emotions that we experience. And the reality is, from my perspective, I deal with the spectrum. I put everything on a spectrum. You name it, I put it on a spectrum. If we're talking about food, I put it on a spectrum. If we're talking about dancing, I put it on a spectrum. Everything goes on a spectrum. So, anxiety. If you see it on a spectrum, you can see it from low to high, right? Let's look at that. Low anxiety, how would we describe that? Maybe feeling a little bit nervous, uneasy, unsure. To the far extreme is feeling paralyzed with fear, right? Is there anything wrong with feeling any of those emotions? I don't think so. First of all, no emotion is bad. It might feel unpleasant or pleasant, but it's not good nor is it bad. What we really want to know is this applicable or appropriate to the situation, right? So we feel emotions on a spectrum, and I think that's a sign of health to be able to move and experience a full range of emotions. Anxiety is the same way. So when we get stuck, or if we're experiencing a particular emotion too much and it's not appropriate for the situation, that's when you know you're having a problem. So if you wake up every morning and you're feeling anxious, it's trying to tell you something, and that's something you want to attend to. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. I think a lot of the times men are accustomed to identifying stress. Right? We know when we're stressed. But what's the difference between stress and anxiety? The truth is, they actually feel pretty similar, at least in my body. When I feel stressed, it produces similar physiological experiences as when I feel anxious. So, how can you tell the difference between anxiety and stress? Anxiety has everything to do with your future orientation, your perspective about the future. If your perspective about the future is negative or unpleasant, you're probably going to feel anxious. Whereas stress might be just because you're under a lot of pressure, right? You might not be worried about whatever situation you're experiencing. It's just a lot going on for you. So it's good to know what happens in your body when you start feeling anxious. Everybody's a little bit different, but it's good to know what happens for you. Some of the things that happen for me that you might be able to relate to is I get a tightness in my chest sometimes when I'm worried about things. My heart rate, speeds up, my breathing changes. And these are some of the physiological experiences I have when I'm feeling anxious. However, the most important thing for me to be aware of when I'm anxious are my thoughts. Anxiety-provoking thoughts are all about negative predictions about the future, negative imaginations about the future. So let's say you get to work late and you're feeling anxious about it. What might you be imagining? You might be imagining your boss yelling at you, or your coworkers looking at you, thinking poorly of you. Those kinds of negative imaginations would cause you to feel anxious. Now, there are a lot of different kinds of anxiety-provoking thoughts. They can take all different kinds of forms or enter our minds in different kinds of forms. Some of them are the what ifs. What if this negative thing happens? That's a really popular one. Then you have some all or nothing thinking. That contributes to my anxiety sometimes. It's either all good or it's all bad. Everything is going to go wrong. Then there's catastrophizing. It's when you imagine one negative thing and it goes to the next and to the next and to the next. Even though everyone feels anxious at some point or another, there are some key questions that we want to consider because anxiety can impact not only our lives, but it can impact our relationships as well. So let's talk about conflict, right? Differences of opinions and disagreements. Often when we feel anxious, we avoid situations. And we avoid and we avoid and we avoid because either we don't trust ourselves in conflict, we don't want to deal with it, we don't want to spend the energy, we imagine it going poorly, we imagine everybody getting upset, and it's not worth it, so we avoid it. Or sometimes we push things down and we don't want to deal with it to the point where it just blows up, or we get aggressive to kind of, safeguard ourselves from going there. What does that do to a relationship? Being unable to talk about things in our relationships puts distance between us. It doesn't make things better, doesn't make things go away. And it actually makes things worse. More often than not, the very thing that we try to avoid ends up happening. You try to avoid an argument, but by not talking about the situation, you're sure to have an argument about it. We want to be respected and feel respected in our relationships. However, when we don't exercise the courage to talk about things, when we avoid things, or even worse, when we are dishonest about things because we feel anxious about addressing them, we lose respect. So it's important to learn how to address and manage our own anxiety. So how do we do that? Well, for starters, breathe. 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 When we take a breath in, that oxygen goes into our lungs and gets into our blood and is pumped to our hearts and pumped to our brain, and we can think better. If you can't think better, you won't feel better. Okay? Thinking better leads to feeling better. A lot of people want to feel better, but they don't want to think better. So when you understand your thoughts and understanding what kind of anxiety-provoking thoughts are contributing to those feelings, you'll be better able to address it. So number 2 is understanding your thought patterns, right? Get familiar with the kinds of anxiety-provoking thoughts that you have so that you can manage them. Whether they're what ifs, whether they're all or nothing, whether they are catastrophizing, fortune telling, or future telling, right? Or mind reading. Those are all different kinds of anxiety-provoking thoughts. You want to get familiar with how you think, because we have certain thought patterns that have been around for a long time. Each one of these thought patterns will have specific ways to address them. For example, if you have all or nothing thinking, right? Everything's black and white. You can usually tell that because we use words like you always, you never, you have to, you can't, you don't, I always. That kind of language, right? It communicates it's all or nothing. One of the questions you could ask yourself is that 100% true? I always mess up. I always make mistakes whenever I talk to people. Is that 100% true? Probably not. When it comes to future telling, fortune telling, or mind reading, whatever you want to call those, sometimes we can address those thoughts by asking questions like, how do you know that for sure? Right? So different thoughts will have different ways to address them. If I can be of help to you with that, by all means reach out to me, info@coachdrew.ca. I would love to help you out. The third thing that we can do when we are feeling anxious, believe it or not, is talk to somebody. It doesn't necessarily have to be a therapist, doesn't have to be a coach. It can be somebody that you trust, and by and large, they're pretty level-headed. That's the kind of person that you want to talk to. So we are going to dive into these topics more and more and more and more. If you have questions, if you have thoughts about it, I want to hear about it. If you want to hear more about this stuff, by all means subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until next time, continue to learn, heal, and grow.